Yesterday we talked about Teddy Roosevelt and we alluded to the big stick diplomacy, but here we're going to take a closer look at it. The first thing that we have to remember is the Roosevelt Corollary, and this has to do with the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This was where America said that European nations had to stay out of the affairs of Latin America, that once the colonies had declared their independence and won their independence, then the Europeans had to stay out. Well, by 1900, this wasn't good enough for America, and Teddy Roosevelt said, we're going to take a more active hand in what's going on in Latin America. First, he said, it is the right of the United States to interfere in the economic matters of other nations in the Americas. And secondly, it is the right of the United States to exercise international police power in the Americas. If there's a problem in Latin America, South America, and what we're talking about is over here, that if anything is going on, then America can intervene whenever it wants. We are the protectorate of all of these nations here. And so when Venezuela got in trouble with Germany, Germany had lent them money and they couldn't pay back. Then we gave Venezuela enough money to pay back Germany so that because Germany wanted to put bases there, and we don't want a European nation putting bases all over this area. We wanted to control this area. You guys can mess around in Europe and Africa and Asia all you want, but the Americas are under the United States protection. And so it was a very strong position of the Monroe Doctrine for a small country. And again, here in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt, with his Roosevelt Corollary, made another strong stance by having these two policies in place. Now, before we go any further, we need to define corollary. It is a statement of belief based on a previously proven idea. So, we had shown that we wanted European nations out of Latin America once once they started declaring their independence in South America and Central America. You can't come back in. They tried doing that with Mexico. Mexico declared its independence from Spain, and then France tried to get back in there, and we just weren't having it. So went over why it was needed. Example, Venezuela getting in trouble with Germany. And the next thing that we look at is the Panama Canal. And this is going to occur, this is our second word, isthmus, a narrow strip of land with water on both sides that links two larger land areas. And that isthmus is the Panama Isthmus, right over here. Isthmus of Panama, very, very narrow piece of land that separates the Caribbean from the Pacific. And this is important. Remember, Teddy Roosevelt is huge into Navy history. He loves the Navy. He's very interested in it. And he sees a major weakness in America's strategic ability, that we've got all these ships on the East Coast, but what if there's a war in the Pacific? You would have to sail all the way around South America and then come up into the Pacific. It takes a very long time. So he's looking at Panama as like, there's just this little strip of land here. If we can just go through the Panama right over here, then we can get to the Pacific very quickly. And so he wants to create this Panama Canal. The trouble is, it's been tried before. The French tried to do it, and people were dying of tropical diseases, mudslides, just all sorts of disasters. It's a very, we're talking about near the equator, and so you've got a lot of problems in order to just exist in this area, let alone build a canal. So some of the problems, the biggest problem was the mosquitoes. I'm sure you all dealt with mosquitoes. They're very annoying. But another thing, too, is that they spread diseases very quickly. And so in warm, tropical, here's the equator right over here, very close to the equator. It's very hot, very tropical, very wet area, lots of swampland and wetlands and so forth. And so it is very difficult to maneuver, to build roads, and to just survive with all the mosquitoes and all the disease spreading things there. So the French gave up. They couldn't figure it out. And so America brought in a lot of experts, railroad expert engineers, to try to figure out how to make this Panama Canal. And They came up with a really cool system. They set up a railroad to take all the dirt out of the Panama Canal area and then made a system of locks. Um, well, first they tried to foresee everything that would go wrong, and they used dams, they controlled rivers, they built a big city nearby to house everybody. They made sure that they had mosquito nets. They dried up all the wet areas to these areas around here around the canal. They tried to drain all these areas and get that water out of there so that the mosquitoes couldn't breed. A lot of things like that, just things that had nothing to do with the canal directly, but had to do with living around the canal and make it much more livable so that people can work and succeed in this canal. And so they built locks instead of just trying to build a river through it. They built locks, which made it easier to get over the land because the land goes up and then down just a little bit, but it still goes up a few feet and down a few feet. And so the French tried to cut through that hump that went through the middle, but instead the Americans built locks. And what that means is, and this is a little bit of engineering, they had a lake here that was higher than the oceans. And so a ship would come in and they would lock, they would open up a lock, close the lock behind the ship, and water then open up these doors over here. Locks are doors. And the water from the lake would pour into this area that was now sealed off and raise it up a few feet. Then the ship would go into the second lock. They would lock the doors behind it and open up these locks, and more water would pour in there and raise the ship up to the lake level. Then it would go through the lake and then go to the fourth lock, and they would just lock the doors behind it, let the water out in front of it so that it would lower it to this lock, and so on and so forth until it got to the Pacific Ocean. And so there was no pumps needed because this lake is above sea level, and it was able to pour down both these areas of locks and get everybody through. And it was such a simple design that they were able to make it work, and it was a engineering masterpiece. And they were able to make the Panama Canal. And now we can truly have a two ocean navy and get back and forth through the Panama Canal.